Hello, good afternoon, the audience, or good morning, or good evening, depending on where you are joining us from. Now we're going to spend the next 40 minutes talking about European fundraising landscape. And we'll be talking about this topic with, I can say, a veteran entrepreneur and investor, Fred Destin. Fred, welcome. I would like to first say a few words about you because you are very famous as an investor in the European landscape, and you also invested in some very interesting companies. You are a founding partner of Stride VC, which you started with Harry Stebbings, who was on our stage yesterday. Before that, you were a general partner at Accel, and you also spent over 10 years tech investing at Atlas Ventures, and we have a very interesting portfolio, which includes companies, unicorn companies like Zoopla, Deliveroo, Secret Escapes, CarWow, Dailymotion, Price Minister. And now you are dealing with the upcoming generation of great entrepreneurs and founders. So, Fred, thank you for coming here and being here again, because you were on a conference stage last time with Eric Schmidt when you both were on a physical conference in London. So, Fred, welcome to this global conference, and please let's start with your view of where do you see the European landscape of VCs right now, and do you see any global trends which are influencing it?
Sure. Well, thank you for having me. It's nice to see you. All right. So I think there's some global trends and there's some European trends. And maybe let's talk a bit about what's happening globally in venture capital. So if we look back, I want to kind of refer to Naval at AngelList, and he had a kind of vision or instinct when he started AngelList, which was that at some point we could disaggregate capital, boards, advice, and to a certain extent, that vision is kind of coming to pass. So the first thing we're seeing is, the venture capital has really become global. And to take a simple example, we're seeing funds like Co2, for example, which was a hedge fund, which has now moved into venture capital as well. They've invested $30 to $50 million maybe in a really powerful data platform, absolutely incredible set of tools. And you see investors like that are able to detect using data anywhere on the planet, really companies that are popping up. So this trend started way back with Tiger Global and DST, but now it's become really prevalent that we see these giant funding machines that are hunting on a global level, and that could be Sequoia Growth and Accel Growth and etc. So step number one is to sort of recognize that that's happening. It's particularly true with the Americans. We joke that the barbarians are at the gate because Benchmark has done a bunch of deals in Europe. Peter Fenton spent time in Paris, did Zenly and a bunch of other great investments. USV has done 8 to 10. And we're seeing a proliferation of US investors coming into the European market, which, by the way, is great for us because we get access as a seed fund, we get access to more capital. It's great for the founders because these super sophisticated investors that are trying to find the next opportunity. But it's really sort of a trend. And of course, the most obvious example of that is Sequoia. I mean, Sequoia is, probably the best venture capital firm in the world today. And they're coming into Europe in a very strategic way, having poached Luciano Sandru out of Accel, my old firm, and being very deliberate in the way in which they're coming in. So the first thing to recognize is this kind of influx of sophisticated growth capital. And with some of them building local presence. Lightspeed, Bessemer, Sequoia all have people on the ground. So that's kind of nice because it's sort of shaking up a little bit our environment. We used to have Index and Accel as the top funds, and they still are very much. But that's sort of creating, on top of challenger funds in Europe like North Zone and Creandum that are doing a great job. We're also seeing this influx of new players. So for entrepreneurs, fantastic, because there's more choice. I think what we're also seeing, again, at a macro level, is the later stage, in a way, of venture capital is starting to really get disrupted by platforms. So, for example, Carta launched a secondary liquidity platform. And I think what we're going to see is the late stage venture capital is going to look more and more like equity capital markets. It's going to be more transparent. It's going to be more automated, and it's going to behave more like a marketplace. To add to that, we have the pressure of SPACs. So there's something like 380 SPACs in market today, which is basically a wall of capital that's like pre-IPO, IPO replacement type capital, whichever way you want to call it. That's like pushing everybody downstream. So I think on the top end of the market, we're seeing all these big trends that are coming in. And then what's really exciting for me is to see that finally, I think seed stage in Europe is seeing a proliferation of new managers. So there's some super narrow strategies, AI dedicated funds. We're seeing ex-entrepreneurs, for example, Cavalry Ventures in Berlin, which I think is a very high quality new player in the field, ex-operators that are coming in and raising small funds. And then on top of that, the phenomenon of micro funds, similarly to what we're seeing in the US. Now, the US has the benefit of very effective platforms like AngelList rolling funds. We don't quite have that in Europe yet. It's kind of harder to do. Regulatory environment isn't so permissive. But we're just seeing basically way more choice for entrepreneurs and a market also that is professionalizing. I would say that 10, 15 years ago, there were a lot of pretty average practitioners in the market. Now we're having people that are more sophisticated. They're also just willing to let entrepreneurs run. So it's it's a pretty exciting time.
Let me ask you, when you talk about this influx of capitals, especially from the US, do you see these investment companies as your competition, or do you more see them as complementary partners because you can then do the follow-ons with them in the companies you previously invested in because you're coming in fairly early?
Well, I think the reality of business, and especially in venture capital, is that you do business with people that you appreciate and rate. And for me, having more of these funds around just gives us more people that we can do exciting stuff with, right? As a seed fund, so we work from pre-seed to late seed, like whatever you want to call them. For us, it just gives us more choice. And in fact, I was just pinging a deal over to Sequoia today, and I'm like, hey, great, here's another top tier firm that I can go work with. On top of that, we're very keen on, we really try and build companies with global ambition from day one. And so, getting access to capital on the West Coast very early is very useful. So we backed a company in the headless CMS space called Strappy. And, it's a French team, it's an open core company. They're very good, they're blowing up on GitHub. But, we were concerned that they wouldn't necessarily get visibility on the West Coast. So we brought in Axel Palo Alto into the seed, and then the CTO of Docker, Guillermo Rauch, who wrote Node.js, and all of these are quite notable West Coast angels. And so by doing that, you're just giving an unfair advantage to a company that's basically based in Paris and has, 6 people very good on product and tech, but I would say half the team doesn't speak English that well. So suddenly you give them a global stage. So I think for us, for our founders, that's just fantastic overall.
It's one of the fundamental shifts which you mentioned to me earlier in our prep call is the truly globalization of capital. And capital is now really able to come from anywhere. How do you see this global shift changing the way you invest in companies?
To be completely honest, I don't think it really impacts us because we're very focused on our craft. And the way I think about how I do the business is, I really work in deep partnership with founders. And the reason why we want to work together is this one-on-one interaction in the room where you feel like, there is a fit, there is a match, and you're going to be on a 5 to 7 year journey together. The global influx of capital for me is just a toolbox and a set of access methods, and just it's much easier to get to the right people on a global basis. So Nat Friedman, the CEO of GitHub, came into one of our companies at a very early stage. This for me is just gives us more amplitude in the way we do our job. So I don't think it's impacted us. I think if you're a multi-stage or a growth fund, you get a serious competitive battle on your hands because now you're really fighting on a global stage. Again, as a seed operation, I think very often the US investors, founders fund, or whoever it may be, kind of enjoy having a local partner, and the founders also enjoy having someone that they can talk to. I'm hiring a COO for one of our companies in Pala, and I can go for a walk with the candidate on the heath. Now, Impala is an interesting case of a company that's building distributed, but the reality is more like a hybrid model. So most of the management teams in London, the organization is distributed, but just having that immediacy and the kind of speed of response and being based into the local ecosystem still matters, right?
That's a big advantage, yes. We'll be taking a few questions overall throughout our talk from the audience. There's one question here from Bernard Chanlier, and he wants to know about the EU/EIC. What's your point of view with the EU coming in as a VC or funding some companies? Do you see them more as a fund of funds role they should have, or do you think they should also consider direct investing in companies?
Yeah, thank you, Bernard. It's a good question. So I have a simple view on this. I think the primary role of the state or European Union is actually to fund fundamental research. And that is a role that where you kind of need to substitute yourself to a certain extent to private markets. Now, yes. The EIF in Europe has played a very important role in helping first-time funds get off the ground. Something like 75 or 80% of first-time funds have the EIF as investors. Now, I used to be quite critical of that because I'm never sure it's good use of public money, but actually, it was really hard 5, 8, 10 years ago to sell Europe as an opportunity. So yeah. I remember when I was doing fundraising, we had to spend half the meeting convincing people that Europe was a good opportunity, and then the other half of the meeting convincing them that we were a good fund. And so it's really tough when you have to evangelize your market before you can even talk about getting a check. So I think the EIF played a really foundational role in helping a bunch of funds get off the ground, especially in the regions, Portugal, etc. Like, I don't think these funds would necessarily exist today, and they're very helpful to the ecosystem. Now, to the EIC specifically, I'm kind of in two minds about it. So if you say we are going to fund deep tech over long periods of time and be a very patient source of capital, I think that is a substitute for research funding, and I kind of like that, right? So I think that's good. What I'm not so keen on is, they start branding themselves as the unicorn factory. And I'm like, hey, just do the work and then let's see how many unicorns you can produce. Because the European Union has a bad habit of trying to have these kind of measurable goals, these big objectives. We're going to deploy this many billions and this much money. To give you one example, they made big pronouncements that they were going to fund 5 funded funds. And, I think there was Aberdeen and LGT, and I forget the others. I think one of them got off the ground, which is Isomer. So, they come out with these big announcements of public policy, and then the red tape gets in the way and they don't execute. So I think the EIC is the best initiative they've put so far forward. And so I'm very, I think that's encouraging. And then I think we have to see how they execute. I would also say that Europe has a bad habit of looking to the state to solve its problems instead of just saying, hey, just fix them within the ecosystem, because you have a pretty vibrant ecosystem.
Fred, you are quite outspoken in terms of knowing exactly what you want, and you also, to be honest, for our audience, you have lots of interesting insights, and you are very, very vocal on Twitter. So I recommend for those of you who are watching us, just find Fred on Twitter. I promise you won't be disappointed. Fred, you have a very strong views of what is a job of a good investor, what a good investor should do, and you have these 4 areas where you think investors should be helpful. Can you tell us about them? What are the 4 key areas which you think investors should help founders with?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I always joke that I love my job, I don't love my industry. Um, and part of the reason is I've lived through the years with investor behavior that can be genuinely difficult for founders. And I kind of over the years have thought about what really matters to founders versus what's nice to have. So very often founders will say, I want somebody with a good network. I want I want somebody with access to customers, etc. But if you boil it down, question number one is, do you have my back? You know, do you fundamentally have my back as a founder? If I run into trouble, and let's remember that chaos is the nature of startup. Startups, in fact, are organizations designed to thrive on chaos, and it's always a mess. You always look like Hercules on the outside, but when you're on the inside, nothing's working, right? That's like the reality of startup life. So the first thing is, can you establish a relationship of trust with someone who's going to see you through the hard times? And that means they don't bring their fears to the board table. They don't bring the problems they have inside their partnership to the board table. They don't bring their anxiety, their anger. None of this has a place, because your job as a VC is to help founders deal with complexity and chaos. Can I help you make the right decisions in conditions of uncertainty? Can I help you deal with a founder fallout? Can I help you deal with burnout? Can I help you deal with intense competition from Uber? When I was on the board of Deliveroo, I remember, when Uber launched Uber Eats in London, they spent £100 million coming into market. They were hunting our drivers,
Oh,
street by street. And you take that onslaught, the most aggressive competitor in the planet
it's a big
coming out.
pressure, yeah.
And you got to come to the board and say, like, okay, how do we fix this? How do we survive? How do we thrive? How do we fight back? And you can't let your own shit kind of come and cloud your judgment. So number one is, do you have my back? Number two is, can you help me make the right strategic decisions or avoid strategic traps? Because as a founder, you're down in the trenches, you're running your business, and sometimes you got to lift your head and kind of go like, okay, am I anticipating what's coming? I'll give you a quick
an example of a trap like that.
Yeah, well, I'll give you a quick example of things that usually catch you out. So like not being ready for scale. So when I was on the board of PillPack with TJ Parker and Elliot, I remember we were doing quite well. And then Elliot came and said, TJ came and said, hey, I think we can get to 50,000 patients by the end of next year. And we were at like 10,000. So it was pretty fast growth. And then I remember asking the questions like, okay, just for argument's sake, what would 250,000 patients look like? In other words, what if we 5x our growth? And I wasn't suggesting we throw money at the wall and hope it sticks, but the thought process was, what are the things that we're going to need for scale 6 months, 9 months, 12 months down the line that we're not foreseeing today because we're busy executing on this quarter's targets, right? And when you shift your thinking like that, so suddenly we're like, you know what, we should reduce legacy or dependency on legacy applications in their case. So we ended up building Pharmacy OS, what we call the Pharmacy Operating System of PillPack, which was a legacy independent pharmacy operating system. And when Amazon acquired the company, they told us, so the guy did the deal. He offered my kid a job, by the way, which is one of my favorite memories. He was playing piano at TJ's house, and my son was with him playing piano. And then my son was like talking to him about tech and stuff. And then he said, "Oh, when you're grown up, you gotta come and ask me for a job." And my son, who's 15 now, he was probably 11 at the time, he still talks about it. But anyway, side story. But he said, we paid $1 billion for the company. We paid 500 for the consumer business, and we paid 500 for Pharmacy OS as a strategic asset. So this is a good example of a strategic decision that you take that actually ends up driving a lot of value. And I think if we'd been narrowly focused on the commercial objectives, we might have made that kind of decision, right?
Yes.
So that's an example of just trying to, raise your thinking sometimes.
One more thing you mentioned is also not to bash founders too much, but instead focus on finding solutions.
Yeah,
which I find super helpful.
This is one of my favorites, right? So most startups miss their numbers. It's like the nature of the beast. Your business plan is poetry, and your forecast is poetry. And so you end up with a company that misses their numbers sometimes by like 40%. And so what do the majority of investors do? They come into the room with a baseball bat and they start bashing the founder going, how could you miss your numbers? And it always makes me laugh because if you think you're anxious about the numbers, how do you think your founder feels?
Exactly. It's bad enough for the founder, yes.
Right. They probably haven't slept for 3 weeks because they're missing their numbers. Like you don't need to go in and like bash people for what they know is something that went wrong. So you flip your thinking and you go, all right, why don't we get to root cause analysis of why we're so off plan and what do we do to fix it? Because there's no halfway house. You either back people, and if you back them, you work with them to solve things, or you don't back them, in which case you have to remove them as CEOs, which is something I hate doing. It's only happened twice in my career, thank God. But if you back people, you back them, and then you back them to find solutions. And very often people end up in the middle where they're kind of doubting you, and they're undermining you, and maybe they're whispering with the other investors, and it's just very toxic. And I find that behavior unhelpful / unacceptable.
I don't like this way of thinking, but obviously it doesn't work with all types of founders. It works mostly with founders who are coachable, who are able to learn. And you also mentioned that you like to help your founders recruit. How do you find time, because I'm sure you have lots of companies in your portfolio, how do you find time to help them get some superstars in the companies?
Well, so if you think about if I go into a company and I'm working with the team and you make an assessment, half the time, if you're not executing on something important, it usually means you don't have the right person in the field, right? So my highest impact activity is to help a company land a star. And so if you think of my time, whenever we're able to contribute to bringing in great talent, that's time extremely well spent. Because I could discuss with management team for 3 months why our demand generation isn't working, or why, but if we hire an amazing person on the demand generation side, that's a problem solved. So the other thing that we can do, so good VCs will do that really well, which is you can really be a sidekick to the founder in helping to land the most difficult people, because they're going to be busy selling the opportunity and the company and the culture of the company. And then you can come in and say, let me paint a picture of where this company fits within its ecosystem. Let me paint a picture of what it's capable of doing. Let me tell you what other companies we've invested in and the kind of community you're coming into. And very often, especially when we take people out of established companies, I find that we can give a lot of comfort to tell people, hey, come into a startup, you're going to learn amazing new skills. If the company fails and you're good at your job, we'll recycle you somewhere else anyway. And just like helping people take these leaps of faith to join these early stage companies. The second thing to say on that is very often our founders. So imagine for a second, paint yourself being Drew Houston at Dropbox when he started out. There were 2 of them in a room doing an alpha version before they went to YC. So everybody starts small and insignificant, but it doesn't mean that you can't go and attract world-class talent very often earlier than you think. So one of the things you can do also is to help founders gain the confidence to go hit really high and to get some real stars into their business. And so I think that's, that can be transformational to a company. And so where else am I going to spend my time? That's like the most useful thing I can do,
Yeah, this is very, very good. It's true that, the best candidates often or sometimes say no. And if you can help them to decide for this company, this could be a deal breaker for a company. There is this gentleman I've met. His name is Randy Adams. He just sold his company, and Steve Jobs was trying to convince him to join Next. And he had an exit, and he wanted to take some time off, so he declined. And after he declined, Steve Jobs still, 2 days later, he called him and he left a bunch of voice messages to him saying, Randy, you're blowing it. You should really come and join the company. And eventually he did. So this is the kind of an example how great founders simply try to look for ways, even after the candidate says no. Maybe there's still a way of convincing these guys. And Randy, he was on the first board of Yahoo, for example, and he's the guy behind PDF. He was VP of engineering at Adobe, and he's now helping one of our portfolio companies. We're having a call actually tonight. But this is a very useful tip of how to help the portfolio companies hire great people. You at Stride, you mentioned that you try to get on when the company is fairly new, is fairly early. How early do you like to invest in the companies, and how do you see your role is at the beginning?
Yeah, I mean, look, I started Stride because I had the track record, and I figured I just want to do shit I enjoy. And what do I enjoy? I enjoy being in a room talking about product strategy. So it's almost like everything I do around it, like the fund, all that stuff, all that apparatus, is an excuse to go in the room with founders and work on whiteboard on how to build a team, what the product strategy should be, what our pricing strategy should be, what our brand and culture should be. And so, like everything in life, whether you're a founder or an investor, doesn't matter. You have to understand what you're fundamentally, what you enjoy, what you're good at, what your purpose is, and what you can be better than the next person at. So for me, I can do Series Bs. I mean, I did Deliveroo at Excel. It's going to be a fantastic investment. But I mean, my heart is in 10 to 20 people in a company and everything left to invent. That's where I get my kicks. This is where I get my sense of mission and passion and purpose. So I'm very fortunate I can do that for a living, and it's also what I'm reasonably good at. So with Stride, we said, okay, the other thing is, how do you make money? Well, to make money, you need to have an angle. Well, my angle is, I'm happy to come to companies when they're very ambiguous. So there's either no data or the data is not predictive anyway. And there's a lot to figure out. So they're like misshapen, they just come out of the swamp and they're not quite walking yet. And to come in with relatively large checks. So we always say we write checks at the stage when it matters, and then to go figure it out. So I don't have any recipes on how things work. I just have an open mind, and I'm pretty good at reframing stuff. And so just go in and do the work. And that's where I get joy out of life. That's where I'm good. And it's also a great way to generate returns, because we tend to come in before valuation inflection points. If things are obvious, everybody's on them. The next thing you have to be able to do is to invest in things that are not obvious. So I refuse to be thematic. And most people say I'm future of work and I'm this and I'm that. I'm like, I'm anti-thematic. I just want shit where I like the founders, I like the mission, and we can make money. That's my theme. And what that means in practice is I really try and keep an open mind and to be very mentally plastic, so that people come to me with unusual ideas and I go like, I never thought about that, but it kind of makes sense. So one of our best performing companies is called Unibuddy, and he does higher education marketing. And I mean, never in a million years would I have thought that I would ever invest in higher education marketing, which on the face of it is a horrible market. But guess what? It solves a real problem for students. We're like the only product company in the market, and we're building an absolutely fantastic organization in a segment where I almost didn't take the initial meeting, because in my mind, I was like, yeah, there's no way I'm ever going to invest in that. And then we did. So I think that's, for me, mental plasticity, if I can use a fancy word, is really, really paramount.
You mentioned this valuation inflection point earlier. We have a question from you of Nissan about the valuation bubble. What are your thoughts on the valuation bubble, and do you think this bubble will eventually pop, or are we going to see a continuation of these crazy multiples? What do you think?
Well, so let's separate two things. very often when companies, startups start to accelerate, because many of them have sort of got infinite operating leverage, they go through this period of non-linear acceleration in value. So from the outside, if you're not inside a company, you think the valuation is crazy. Good example was the Clubhouse first round of financing. Everybody's making fun of Andreessen Horowitz because they paid 100 million. And I put out a blog post and I'm like, guys, like community, we have seen this 15 times before, that something that looks absurd to you will not look absurd in 6 months. So like hold judgment back, because these acceleration valuation are non-linear. And if you catch the right one, you know, they're almost like fractals, right? Like they grow super fast. So that's one aspect, which is it's always good to be, if you see a valuation you don't understand, instead of saying that's stupid, you probably ask yourself the question, what is it that I don't see, right? Now we're talking about the bigger valuation bubble, which is the markets are insane. We are at the end of a 12-year cycle of startup bull market, and people think nothing can fail anymore. So it's like the risk has been priced out. Everything is being priced to the max. And you know, there's a ton of investors out there who just think they can't fail in tech because right now everything's working. It's almost like you can't miss being successful with a startup because the markets are so permissive. So I think we just have to be very cognizant of this kind of secular trend of value creation. And then right now, I think we're completely overheating. The Bay Area is out of control. And I think there'll be a lot of blood on the walls when you look at the later stages of the market, for sure.
And how does this affect your decision making personally? So when you take a meeting in a company and you love the product, you think it's going to be a great company, but the expectations are just too much, and it doesn't seem to work in your mind. Do you just refuse the meeting, or do you take a chance and invest at a big valuation that you would have a couple of years ago?
Well, so if you say no to an exceptional founding team on the grounds of valuation, usually you're making a mistake. Now, I don't have the problem of being in Series C or B with like $400 million valuation on a company making $1 million. I have the benefit of being at seed where there is some variation, but it's not massive. But guess what? My best investment in Stride Fund 1 is Alex Chessman at Kazoo. Okay? The seed was incredibly expensive. It was our second check out of the fund. So imagine we just started the fund. We hadn't even fully closed. So we just closed on 45 million. You know, today we close on 100 million. So say we were half down on the fund. So I was still fundraising. And my second check is an insanely expensive 30 million pound seed round. Okay. This thing will return the fund probably multiple times over. So the time when I completely broke my rules is likely to be by far my best investment in my first fund.
So let's spend a minute to talk about it, because this is, of course, you know, Alex is an exceptional founder. You know, he was the guy who was in the team of Lachfilm, which is the European version of Amazon Video. Amazon bought them. Then he was at this unicorn company which you invested in earlier, Zoopla, and now, so he knows exceptionally well how to scale a company, and you probably can see that. But you mentioned slightly at the beginning of this talk the SPACs, and now this company, and let's see if you happy to talk about it or not. Kazoo is considering a SPAC. You know, there's several valuations flying around from 2 billion to 6 billion, which is an amazing feat from you as an investor. Are you not worried that, for example, if Kazoo is considering this SPAC and these markets would kind of crumble and the bubble would burst, that this is going to catch the company in the crossfire?
So I really can't comment specifically on speculation in the press. To touch on the SPAC market for a second, there are amazing SPACs and Wild West kind of SPACs. So some of the best SPACs on the planet have incredible sponsors behind them. You know, you're talking about world-class investors with very strong tracks. and some of the SPACs are kind of fly-by-night operations. So what will happen with the SPAC market is like everything else, the best platforms will get to the best targets. And then there's going to be a bit like the ICO bubble, there's going to be probably 50 or 100 SPACs which are a disaster, and 50 or 100 SPACs which are amazing, and then a bunch of stuff in the middle. So some people say SPACs have a bad name, and some people say SPACs are a fantastic alternative to IPOs, like Bill Gurley. I would just point to DraftKings. So DraftKings is a portfolio company of my old firm, Accomplice. And DraftKings was public as a SPAC. A lot of people had doubts about it, and now it's a $24 billion market cap company. After the merger of the entities, nobody remembers it's a SPAC. It's just a public stock, right? So I think SPACs are a great tool, and I think they're also, there's also a SPAC bubble. So both, it will be both great and awful.
Yes, in your space, as an early stage investor, you have this influx of micro VC funds or early stage investors. One of them is now being built by Harry Stebbings, which co-founded as your partner Stride. Do you see this as part of this bubble, or it's actually good that these new funds are coming in because there's still an under investing opportunity in the early VC stage? How do you see that?
Well, so there are over 1,000 seed funds in the US. Don't exactly know what the number is, but it's a huge population.
Yeah.
So differentiating yourself for the seed funds is definitely a challenge. But I think for me, if you look at Sahil with his rolling fund, or what Harry's going to do, I think it's like fundamentally great for founders, because now you can pick your syndicates. Say you want to work with Harry and I, so you want somebody like deeply engaged in company building, and at the board, that's me. You want somebody with an incredible world-class network, especially on the West Coast, that's Harry. So now you can kind of pick and choose for the syndicates from I think just a vast array of people, a bunch of which are operators, which not all operators are great investors, but if an operator is a great investor, he tends to be the best kind of investor you can have, right? So I think it's here to stay. I think it's structurally enabled. I think it's fantastic for founders. I don't think it's a bubble at all. And I think it's a very exciting development for the industry. Now, all this puts pressure on the VC firms, the arrival of the hedge funds and the SPACs, because some of them are very sophisticated, the arrival of operator micro funds. So if you're a traditional venture capital firm, you better know what you stand for. Like, you better have a reason to exist, right? Because unless you're one of the market leaders, you're going to get killed. So I think there is an evolution there. Now, when people say, "Oh, the VC market's over," etc., all that's bullshit, right? It's just there's going to be an evolution and a professionalization and a kind of purification of the venture market. All of that. The only thing that matters to me is like it's more fun, we do better work, and it's great for founders. So I think it's all good, and we should let 1,000 flowers bloom.
Okay, that's fair enough. Now, you also mentioned that the VCs are professionalizing, especially in Europe. One of the feats of the good professional corporate governance is that an investor knows that investors should be on the same side as the founder, and there should be a strong team. Well, one thing you mentioned earlier, which I really like, is that you try to shield the investor from problems and make sure that there is investor alignment. How do you do that?
Yeah, I think what you're referring to. So I've seen a lot of unhelpful investor behavior in my career, and very often it's because some investors come with a very strict view of how a company should operate, or maybe a lack of understanding of their market. And so job number one is to create a forum at the board where the conversations are intelligent and open, and where you let the founder ultimately make the decisions. When that doesn't happen, sometimes you have to, as I said, as I expressed in my talk to you before the live here, is like shield the founder and work on investor alignment, because there's nothing more toxic than a group of investors who start to talk among themselves, and one person is poisoning the well and creating doubts in the mind of the investor group, and then the founder is starting to lose trust, and then he doesn't want to share as much. It can be a very negative spiral very quickly. So, I don't have a problem going to people and telling them, hey, you're overstepping. You need to, you don't run this company. Like, let's have an open discussion about what you think the strategy should be. But then you have to do a la Amazon. You have to disagree and commit. You can't be constantly sowing doubt. And or also take the investors out of the room and see whether we can align together on a common mission. So we don't want to be disrespectful to people, but at the same time, you got to protect the founder.
It's a very healthy approach. I like it. On a finishing note, Fred, I want to ask you. This is now the pandemic, and many people are pessimistic. People are getting really angry about having just too many calls and Zooms and videos and so on. I want to ask you about what opportunities do you see for founders from times like this in the pandemic? How do you see that? And what would be your advice to founders in regards to the pandemic?
I mean, I think we're running out of time with the panel, so just give a quick final answer. But look, I've seen the pandemic's hard, but the pandemic is mostly been a giant accelerant for tech. We see it in e-groceries being accelerated by 5 to 7 years, e-commerce by 2 to 5 years, collaboration by 2 to 5 years. What used to be loose digital agendas at large corporations have now become burning fires. So yeah. This is the pandemic's like kind of an accelerant. And on top of that, I think we live in a unique time in history where, if you think about it, we have cloud, we have analytic tools, we have talent, we have availability of capital. This is like the golden age of startup creation. And startups are these organisms designed to thrive on chaos. And then I have all the tools to build really fast and really well. So I think we should be all super grateful that we're in tech. Or tech-enabled businesses. They don't even need to be tech businesses anymore, and kind of realize that this is we just have 20 years, I think, to run of being able to build beautiful companies. And I for one, am super excited. That's why I've been doing this for 20 years. I'm still as hungry as day one because I think the opportunities are massive.
And we can feel the excitement. Fred, thank you so much. In case there are some exceptional founders watching this talk now or watching it later, what is the best way how they can reach you? So I'm at fdestin on Twitter, and I'm Fred at stride.vc on email, and you don't get points for guessing that one because it's pretty obvious. Okay, Fred, thank you so much for being here and for your wisdom, and we'll see you around.
Sweet. Thank you very much, Marian.
London. Bye-bye.